You've spelunked into the Matt Cave. Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Matt Cave. Thank you all so much for spelunking on by. This week, we have a stepping down, weirdly worded change at the University of Utah. We also have bowl season, if anybody cares about that anymore. Hint, nobody does. Nobody's cared about bowl season for years now. And I don't think anybody should have ever really cared about bowl season, but I'll get into that here in a little bit. And then the Video Game Awards happened this past week, and it was actually good. After last year's debacle, I actually enjoyed what I saw. So I'll talk about that as well. Maybe some talk about BYU men's basketball, a little bit about the Mammoth, who knows. But those are the three main topics I want to touch on today. So thank you all so much for being here. As always, like, comment, subscribe, give them updates wherever it is, however you listen. Helps me out a ton, and it helps out the show. You guys have been great so far, and you just keep being your awesome selves. So let's start. Oh, yeah, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, the Matt Cave Podcast. You can find me. I'm in all those places, and wherever your favorite podcasts are sold or given out for free or whatever it is. All right. Now, let's start with that announcement from the University of Utah. So it's not a retirement. I want to continue to iterate this, and I want this to remain in your thoughts. Kyle Whittingham is not retiring. There was none of that word in any of the press releases, statements from the different people involved. It was Kyle Whittingham stepping down. And what I find even more interesting is the timing. So, the timing comes like a week and a half after the private equity firm announced that they have partnered with the University of Utah for $500 million. Half a bill. Methinks there might be some chicanery afoot. I was part of that agreement that Kyle Whittingham was to step down. The timing would point to yes. In the past, Kyle Whittingham was slow to adapt to and adopt NIL and the transfer portal. Utah fans saw what happened last year. Or not last year. Well, I guess this season's still going on. So last season. And he adopted it this year, and hey ho, what do you know? 10-2 season, almost a college football playoff contender. And if it weren't for two other teams in the conference that are top 12 teams, they would have been undefeated. So what I'm thinking it's just a little too fishy. The timing is a little too convenient. And the fact that nobody else is talking about it is a little odd. I haven't seen even the most tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist say anything about it. Maybe there hasn't been enough time for people to do it, but the dots connect a little bit too easily for me. Towards the end of the season, looking at Kyle Whittingham going up and down the sidelines, how he was talking in postgame and pregame interviews, how he was discussing his roster next season, that did not sound like a coach that was ready to retire or step away from the game. In comes $500 million, and all of a sudden, he's changed his mind. I don't know. Maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here, but it seems a little too convenient for me. Little too convenient, especially when the University of Utah is in prime position to compete for the Big 12 championship and a college football playoff berth year over year now. Now that they've got everything squared away, even before the $500 million investment. Just simmer. Let that simmer for a little while, Spelunkers. Think on that for a little bit here. Just seemed a little too convenient. Now, let's talk about Kyle Whittingham. He's the best coach in the University of Utah football history, period. End of story. You can't even debate it. You can't. You just can't. Multiple conference championship victories, conference championship game appearances, 2 Rose Bowl appearances where they, if it weren't for injuries, they probably would have won both, and a record against BYU that would make my younger self's blood curdle. He dominated the rivalry. He dominated the state of Utah in a way that only Lavelle Edwards before him has ever done. Now, he was, growing up, for me, the Antichrist. That's how I viewed him. He was everything that was wrong with everything. So, saying these words is really, it's not as hard as I thought it would be, but it is kind of difficult for me. But he was the second greatest football coach in the state of Utah, in the state of Utah's history. And I'm not lumping in like Andy Reid or anything like that because he didn't coach in the state of Utah. So it's like BYU coaches Utah, Utah State, etc. So in the lexicon of anything and everything, it should be the Kyle Whittingham Field at Rice-Eccles Stadium. I don't see how it can be anything but that. And it should be done sooner rather than later. I just think there needs to be an investigative piece from someone somewhere, whether it's the Salt Lake Tribune or the City Weekly, I don't know, to dive a little bit into this little investment piece. And Utah Athletic Director Mark Harlan's thumbprint is all over this. What sort of plot was afoot here? Because it just, there's a sour taste in my mouth with all of this. Especially when Utah is so close to getting into the college football playoff, and it's everything that Coach Whittingham has built. That's not something you just walk away from. So I'm not going to belabor the point. I'm not going to continue on it, but it just feels off. I'll just leave it at that. But congratulations on a Hall of Fame career to Coach Whittingham. He deserves all the accolades. He deserves the field at Rice-Eccles Stadium to be named after him, and it should be no different. Now let's move on to Morgan Scalley. He is the next head coach, as everybody expected. There was no coaching search. There was no contacting potential candidates. It was Morgan Scalley. It was baked into his contract. They just needed to iron out a couple of details and move forward with it. What'll be interesting with Morgan Scalley is how he builds his coaching staff. Because I don't know in people's contracts what provisions were there once Whittingham stepped down. Does everybody just get a bump up like Morgan Scalley did? Or does Morgan Scalley get to build his own coaching staff from the ground up, or by pulling in pieces that Whittingham already had in place and then putting his own spin on it? That'll be interesting to see. We'll see how that all goes during the offseason. I don't think he's going to move on from the offensive coordinator. That would be a stupid move. But there is a little bit of intrigue on this as well, because with the mess that's going on at Michigan could have swooped in and plucked Morgan Scalley. They could have. So good on the University of Utah for moving swiftly here and naming Morgan Scalley the next head coach, making that public, making it official, and not losing him to a place like Michigan. But that I don't see Morgan Scalley going into a dumpster fire like that. I mean, there has not been a football program in the country that has got caught with their hand in the cookie jar more times than Michigan since Coach Harbaugh was there. There just hasn't been. Oh, I'm not going to go into the Sharon Moore stuff because that's out of my purview, but that's wacky. Anyway, and he's only 4 years older than me. How can you be so stupid? Anyway, Morgan Scalley, new head coach, was always going to happen. His defense did collapse in the last, I would say, 2.5 games of the season. It'll be quite the Herculean task for him to fix what was going on there, because it was systemic issues. It was nobody tackling. It was two guys filling the same gap. It just wasn't sound defense, which is really odd to say for a Morgan Scalley-led defense. But that's another story for another day. Utah fans, you have your coach. You still have Whittingham until the end of 2025. January 1, the keys of the kingdom get turned over to Morgan Scalley, who has been a Utah man his entire life. So at least you got that going for you. But man, it's just odd to me. Hey, we're getting a $500 million private equity investment. Oh, Coach Whittingham is stepping down but not retiring? That's odd language. All right, bowl season, though. Do you care? I don't. I probably won't even really be watching the games. I'll have them on, but I'll probably be doing other stuff while they're on. The University of Utah is facing off against the University of Nebraska in the Las Vegas Bowl. Doesn't matter what conference Utah is in. They just can't get away from Las Vegas, I guess. So that is a bowl game where Nebraska probably won't have their starting quarterback in Dominic Raiola. People are expecting him to enter the transfer portal. I don't see very many University of Utah players hitting the transfer portal. I just don't see it. Isaac Wilson, obviously, but he was never a part of Jason Beck's plans. He's just not the kind of quarterback that would run that offense well at all. I mean, could you imagine watching Isaac Wilson trying to run a QB power? Oops. Yeah, luckily it never got to that point for the Utes. But, man, that would not be good for anybody. So I foresee Isaac Wilson getting some offers from Group of 5 schools, but he's not going Power 4. I don't see it. Especially with BYU stocked at the quarterback position. They got Bear Bachmeier for a couple more years, and they got Ryder Lyons slotted in right after that. There's no space for Isaac Wilson. And then Utah State could be a possibility for him. He would become automatically the starter. There's nobody there that would supplant him. But I don't know if Bronco Mendenhall has that sort of pull with the Wilson family. I don't think so. So there's your transfer from Utah. BYU lost Lamison Waller III. He could have been a good receiver. He just could not separate himself from the glut of receivers that BYU has behind Chase Roberts and Parker Kingston. Most notably, Cody Hagan and JoJo Phillips, the drop machine. So that's really the main transfers for those two schools that have really come up. No shock names have entered the portal and nothing like that. But the bowl games themselves. So the Las Vegas Bowl for Utah against Nebraska. Utah should win this game, easy peasy, hands down. Whether Devin Dampier actually plays or not, because he is dealing with an injury. If it's Bird Ficklin, Utah's going to win. If it's Devin Dampier, Utah's going to win. Nebraska's just not a very good team. They have a wannabe Patrick Mahomes at quarterback who's probably not going to play. And that's really all Nebraska has. So Utah should win this bowl game, send Kyle Whittingham out with a victory, end the season at 11-2, third in the Big 12, and finish in the top 15. That's really, really good. Now BYU, going into the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Oh, by the way, the Las Vegas Bowl is December 31st. That's why the transition's happening January 1 between Whittingham and Scally. All right. Now to BYU. Pop-Tarts Bowl. It was originally going to be against Notre Dame. That was the invite. It was BYU versus Notre Dame. The two teams that got jilted from the college football playoff. Could you imagine the show that could have been put on there? The People's National Championship or whatever. I mean, I think that would have been ridiculous, but it would have been a fun advertising ploy. Getting the real crown, the Pop-Tarts crown. But Notre Dame pouting, whining, looking like just a petulant child. Nobody is going to want to have them in their conference now. Anyway, that's their AD has gone off the deep end. Their athletic director over in Notre Dame has gone off the deep end. And he just does not care about the future anymore. Like, he's going full Mark Harlan after the BYU-Utah game last year. That's how he's going. Anywho, BYU, Georgia Tech, should be a really fun game. Haynes King of Georgia Tech was an early season Heisman frontrunner. He was very solid, if not unspectacular. He runs their offense very well. Their offense is very similar to BYU's offense, where it's run heavy. They run a lot of quarterback runs, and they throw the ball off of play action. So there's nothing new under the sun for defensive coordinator Jay Hill to prepare for against Georgia Tech. It's just how deflated BYU is after getting blown out by Texas Tech for a second time. It'll be interesting to see how much pep in their step there's going to be. Because they had designs on winning the Big 12. They had designs on hosting one more home game in the college football playoff. And we all saw what happened. Texas Tech is just on another level than BYU. But BYU got to keep their guy in Kalani Sitake. He got to keep his coordinators. They got a raise as well. And he also got a renewed interest or promise of investment into NIL for BYU as a university, not just the football program, which I thought was very clever on his part. Make him look like good guy Kalani still. That's really smart. So this game should be interesting. Georgia Tech is ranked 22nd. The ACC and how they worked out how Duke got into the championship game needs to be studied for years to come, because the ACC championship game should have been Georgia Tech versus Miami. That would have been a way more fun game to watch. That would have been much more easily digestible for everybody around. But instead, the world got Duke versus Virginia. And it wasn't college basketball. It was college football. So that happened as well. Bowl season should be pretty fun. If you care. I don't. Not even a little bit. Like, not even a little bit do I care about bowl season this year. Utah State is going bowling as well to the famous Idaho Potato Bowl against Washington State. Washington State is in a state of upheaval. Their coach left for a different opportunity. Who knows how many of their guys are going to continue to play on. Utah State should be fine. Nobody really has announced a transfer. I would be kind of surprised if John Miller doesn't dip his toes into the transfer portal, because there are going to be schools that are very interested in him, namely the two schools in Utah. The University of Utah and BYU both will have holes at linebacker they'll want to fill, and John Miller could fill that in spades. There's also a certain linebacker at the University of California who will probably enter the transfer portal again, by the name of Harrison Taggart. Yes, BYU fans, that Harrison Taggart. So he could come back to the state of Utah as well, but only in red. I don't really see him going back to BYU, although Kalani Sitake is a wizard. So he could bring Harrison Taggart back as well. So that's some interesting things to look out for. Keeping tabs on the Utah State team, who's going to be staying around before the Potato Bowl, which is December 22nd. Up in Boise. We'll see what happens. I didn't have Utah State going to a bowl. In fact, nobody did. And here they are, representing the Mountain West Conference against a Pac-12 team that is soon to be their conference opponent in Washington State. Who do I think is going to win this game? I don't know. Honestly, I do not know. Not even ESPN really knows. They have right now their matchup predictor at Washington State is a 56% favorite, but that's before anybody's really entered their name into the transfer portal. So there's still some time here for that to change. If we want to look at the other predictions here, let's go to Utah, Nebraska. Utah has an 80% chance to win. That's because Dominic Raiola transferred out. So that's pretty much Utah's game to lose. BYU, Georgia Tech. ESPN has BYU at a 66% chance to win the game. So 2/3 chance, basically. I think it'll be a bit closer than that. I really do. But Georgia Tech relies heavily on Haynes King. If BYU can shut down Haynes King, he's not really the greatest passer of the football. Think Bear Bachmeier light. We'll see. Because all of BYU's guys are going to be there. Sands, Lamison, Waller III, who was a depth guy anyway. But there you go. That is the post-mortem on the football season for all three schools, what they have to look forward to in the bowl game, and any announced transfers that at least I know of. I'm sure there's going to be more coming down the pipeline as we get closer to the new year. Because the transfer portal is only open for a couple of weeks in January, we're going to get a lot of names entered there. All right. And then names going pro, we'll see after bowl games. At least for BYU and Utah. They could announce before the bowl game. I don't know if they will or not. Guys like Isaiah Glasker, LJ Martin, Devin Dampier. You know, there are some guys who could say, yeah, I'm going pro now. Wayshawn Parker. It'll be interesting to see what happens, though. All right, really quickly, let me dive into college basketball. And BYU men's basketball, that win against Clemson was awesome. It was great. And then they went out and they dominated University of California, Riverside. 100-53. So that's really cool to see that they take care of business, and they take care of business in a major fashion. But the real stuff starts really soon for BYU men's basketball. They've got 3 more warm-up games against Pacific, Abilene Christian, and Eastern Washington to round out the calendar year, and then they get into conference play. If the Clemson game is any indicator, BYU needs to come out of the gate strong against all opponents. They cannot rely on themselves coming back in the second half like they have against teams like Wisconsin, Miami, Clemson, Dayton. And it's a young team. Obviously, college basketball, they're all young kids, but they've got to be better coming out of the gate. They really do. But the team's really fun to watch. I'll give them that. From Keba Keita to AJ DeBonsa to Robert Wright III, Richie Saunders. They're a fun team to watch. So that's really all I have for college basketball right now. As far as the Utah Mammoth go, they missed out on the 2 guys that I mentioned in my Facebook post a couple of days ago. Tristan Jerry went to Edmonton, the goalie from Pittsburgh that I wanted to help upgrade the goalie room for Utah. And then Quinn Hughes got traded in a massive nuclear explosion, tectonic shift in the NHL, and he got traded to a division rival in Minnesota. 2 guys that I wanted GM Bill Armstrong to go after in a major way. He did not. I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm going to let them ruminate for a while before I put Bill Armstrong on blast. So, wait for that. Okay. But the team beat the Kraken. They had a very entertaining game that they lost against the Florida Panthers. They look like they're starting to get back on track, but we've been fooled by that before this season. They play the Penguins today as of me recording this. In fact, they drop the puck here in a couple of hours. I don't know. It's another road trip. Utah's played more games on the road than any other team in the NHL so far this season. They've also played, I think, the most games overall of any team in the NHL so far this season. So by no means has this been easy. No means has this been anything normal for any team in the NHL, really. But if Gary Bettman pulls the NHL from the Olympics at the 11th hour, he will cement himself as the most hated and the most worthless commissioner in the history of sports, time immemorial across the planet. Okay, I had to get that out of my system. It's out of my system. So let's move on to the Game Awards. So the Game Awards, if you are unaware, let me educate you. It's basically the Oscars for video games, the Grammys, whatever. And it was built from the ground up after E3. Everybody remembers E3. It was the summer showcase of games being announced and new games demoed, and it's just massive. The Electronics Entertainment Expo, E3, when that shuttered because of dipping attendance, Sony pulled out of it, Nintendo pulled out of it, so it was just Xbox and a bunch of indie studios, and then COVID hit them, and they just decided to shutter the whole thing. Jeff Keighley, the guy who is in charge, he's the face of the Game Awards, didn't take too kindly to that, and so he created something from the ground up, from scratch, in 2021, and now we have the Game Awards every year at the end of the year, and it's something to look forward to unless you talk about last year, which I'm not going to. I really hated the Game Awards last year. This year, it was fantastic. It felt like an awards show. It felt like it again. Instead of Jeff Keighley praising his friends, which is what last year was. And then sucking up to corporate overlords. That's what last year was too. So this year, the game that dominated anything and everything across the spectrum was a game called Claire Obscure Expedition 33 from Sandfall Interactive and Kepler Interactive. And this game, let me tell you, Spelunkers, if you have never played a role-playing game, if you have never dived or dipped your toes into that genre of games, this is the game to do it. Because a lot of what I heard when I worked at GameStop, the reason people didn't play role-playing games is because it was either too slow or they didn't like the turn-based combat. It was just not enough to do. This game fixes that in a major way. The turn-based combat is interactive. There's quick time events. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on with it. The story is immaculate. The voice acting is second to none. And the music is absolutely breathtaking and causes you to feel emotion. And more emotion than just like the metal, Doom type music where it's, pedal to the floor, get your heart rate up to 200 beats a second, that sort of thing, or a minute, rather. Clair Obscur won Game of the Year. It won Best Debut Game for an Indie Studio. It won Best Indie Game. It won Best Score. It won Best Voice Acting. It won Best Story. It won almost everything it was up for. And because of that, sans the Game of the Year, when it was leading up to that final announcement of who won Game of the Year, I was very scared they were going to screw it up. Because if we flash back to like the first or second Game Awards, Red Dead Redemption 2 also swept a lot of the categories, but it didn't win Game of the Year. And so I thought they were going to be doing that again. Like in sports, we call it voter fatigue, where you don't want to award the same guy MVP year after year, so you prop somebody else up with no real argument other than, oh, well, he's won it before. That's what I thought was going to happen with Clair Obscur. I was very scared it was going to go to like Donkey Kong, or it was going to go to Death Stranding 2, because Jeff Keighley is friends with Hideo Kojima, the guy who was behind the story of Death Stranding 2. So I was very worried about that. But they got it right. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is the rightful Game of the Year, and they solved the problem that I had last year, where Metaphor ReFantazio should have won Game of the Year last year. Instead, they gave it to Astrobot, a Sony property. That was Jeff Keighley and company bowing down to a corporate overlord. Luckily, this year, we didn't have that problem. So, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 won Game of the Year. It won Best Game Direction. It won Best Narrative. I mean, it goes on and on. I'm not going to bore you with all of the awards it won. So that is one thing I wanted to talk about. They got it right. And you can also listen to the soundtrack of Clair Obscur on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music. It's everywhere. I encourage you to do so because it's gorgeous. So that was one piece I wanted to touch on from the Game Awards. The other one was 3 gaming giants were all but missing from the Game Awards. First, Call of Duty. Call of Duty has become a microtransaction, popular, I don't even know what to call it, just like social zeitgeist, I don't know. It just has become a terrible amalgamation of everything that's wrong with gaming. And it was absent, completely absent from the Game Awards. And I loved that. I loved that so much because that also showed that the Game Awards won't be bullied by AAA studios to include games that have no business being there. I love that to death. The other one, Destiny 2. Destiny 2 has been a live service game for a very, very long time. And it had nothing, not even a whisper of its name came across. Now, Destiny was nominated for one category. It was the best mobile game of the year. And that was, I'm trying to find the name of the actual game because I never touched it. But it's like Destiny Rising, I think, is what it's called. And it's a mobile game. So it's essentially a gacha game where you need to spend money to do stuff. So that doesn't count. And then the third is World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft used to be nominated every year for different game awards for best community support or best ongoing game, best live service game, even Game of the Year a couple of times. But it hasn't even sniffed the Game Awards for the past 2 years. And that breaks my heart. Because, as you all know, World of Warcraft holds a very special place in my life, in my history. And seeing what it's become breaks my heart a little bit. And so I just wanted to mention that those three video games, when people say video game, people think of it. And yes, by the way, I just found it. It's Destiny Rising. It's a mobile game. So it doesn't really count as a Destiny game for me. So those three games, when you say video games, people think Call of Duty. Some people think World of Warcraft. And then others, when they think sci-fi, think Destiny, have fallen to the wayside. And it's because of corporate greed. A lot of the people that work on the game, the developers, the artists, they care. And they care a lot. There's a reason they work on that game. But because of their corporate overlords going for the easy money, the games have fallen very, very far. And I just wanted to call that out because nobody's talking about that either. Everyone is lauding Clair Obscur as they should. They're lauding Jeff Keighley for doing another wonderful award show, which it was. But those three, Call of Duty less so. I mean, it taught me what gamer rage was. It also thickened my skin to be able to do a show like this just by surviving those Call of Duty lobbies as you loaded into the game. Kids today would not survive those lobbies. They just wouldn't. So I just wanted to bring that up. Games I'm looking forward to next year real quickly here. I know I'm out of time, but I do want to bring them up that were announced or shown at the Game Awards. No Law. It's a RPG cyberpunk action open world game. It looks like so much fun. It has no release date. Phantom Blade Zero. It's another Dark Souls, Elden Ring type game that looks absolutely gorgeous, fluid, and just a lot of fun. Gang of Dragon, if you know the Yakuza games, it is in that vein. It's not a sequel or attached to that series of games, but it's the guy who created that universe doing a different game. Then you've got Star Wars Galactic Racer. It's another pod racing game. No release date for that either. There's also the big one for me, and this one's not going to be coming out for years. But the fact that they felt comfortable enough to announce it is very good news. It's Star Wars Fate of the Old Republic. And I wanted to end the episode today just talking about that. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2 are two of the very best RPG games and Star Wars games ever made. In fact, they were the impetus to create the MMORPG Star Wars The Old Republic. Those games are fantastic. They hold up incredibly well to this day. And I'm so excited that there's going to be a new one. There was no louder crowd reaction to an announcement of a game during the Game Awards than Fate of the Old Republic. So I'm not the only one who's excited for this, but we're probably not going to see it until at least 2030 is my sort of thing on it. So it's my read on it. And then one more thing. I know I'm always saying one more thing, but this really is it. I fear that Fable is dead. With the direction Xbox Game Studios is going and how they're handling their console and just everything they're doing incorrectly over there, I fear that Fable is dead. We haven't heard a peep about Fable in 2 years. And I was really looking forward to that game. It looked hilarious. It looked fun. It looked like everything that was missing from an RPG, and now it's gone. So I think it's dead, and that's very sad. Sorry to have that bummer to end the episode, but thank you all so much for being here, and I will see you all next week, the week of Christmas, when we spelunk back into the Matt Cave.